Welcome to Two Way, everyone, and the debut of my new program. It's called Two Way Tonight. Glad you could join us. This will be our regular time to meet every night, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, to talk about what's happened previous day and to look forward to the next day. As always, the ethos here, peace, love, and understanding. If you don't like what somebody's saying because you disagree with them politically, use it as an opportunity to learn what others in America are thinking about what's going on. And as always, we love for people to contribute. You can be in the chat on YouTube if you're watching there, or here on Two Way. But as always, we ask you adhere to the same sensibility in the chat, not get too negative there. Spirited discussion. I'll take your questions soon. I'm going to run through some stuff from today, some reporting I've done on state of the race, and of course, the events around the commemoration of the 1-year anniversary of the tragic events of last October 7th. And then we'll go to your questions and comments. If you'd like to get in, please raise your hand. As always, we love return customers, but we also love new business. If you've never raised your hand before to be part of the conversation, as political analyst Rod Stewart would say, tonight's the night. So we'd love to see more of you hands up to be part of the conversation about Israel, about the race, about whatever you want. Very little activity from the candidates today that didn't relate to Israel, both former President Trump, Vice President Harris doing events. In Israel itself, a pretty tense day. Got a tweet, or saw a tweet rather, from one of our two-way community members, Michael Granoff, from the United States. Originally lived with his family in Israel for quite some time. His tweet says, "Shall we recap the day? This morning with my team," meaning his team at work, "a siren forced us into a bomb shelter by a rocket from Gaza. Then this afternoon, flying out of Tel Aviv, his flight was halted by a missile from Yemen. And then tonight, his family is back in a bomb shelter because of rockets from Lebanon." So unfortunately, even as they're observing throughout the country in different ways, commemorating the attack of a year ago, it's business as usual for those in Tel Aviv and elsewhere in the country dealing with incoming. Here in the United States, both presidential candidates spoke about Israel and did events related to Israel. Let's start with Vice President Harris, who spoke at the Vice President's residence around a ceremony where she and her husband planted a tree on the grounds. So let's listen to Kamala Harris.
First and foremost, I believe that we must never forget. I will never forget October 7, and the world must never forget. What is asked of us? We must work to ensure nothing like the horrors of October 7 can ever happen again. And on this solemn day, I will restate my pledge to always ensure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself, and that I will always work to ensure the safety and security of the Jewish people here and around the world. What is asked of us? We must reunite the hostages held in Gaza with their families, and I will never stop fighting for the release of all the hostages, including the American citizens, living and deceased: Omer, Idan, Sagi, Keith, Judy, God, and Ite.
Okay.
What is asked
Vice
of
President
us?
spoke at some length at this ceremony. You may have been able to hear in the background there some sirens. There were anti-Israeli protesters outside the Vice President's residence, heavily protected, but audible by the poll reporters who were inside covering the event. Earlier today, here in New York City, Donald Trump was at the gravesite of a very important figure for Orthodox American Jews, the Rebbe who's buried in Queens. And Donald Trump went there, and you'll see names you don't normally see. Donald Trump in a yarmulke, probably not best positioned on his head, but so he did that event this morning and engaged with those folks. This image will mean very little to most of you, but for Orthodox Jews around the country, this will be and is a big deal for him to go there. He's gone there previously think he went there 4 years ago, in fact, in the 2020 election. So that was how he started his day. He's back in Florida now, and is at this hour supposedly is scheduled to do an event at his club there, again commemorating the anniversary. So we may see some of that before we part here during this episode. He did speak at some point today. I know he did at least one TV interview that I haven't tracked down yet, but he also did a radio interview. Sid Rosenberg was hosting Sid and Friends from Israel. He was there with Michael Rappaport, and Donald Trump engaged in the kind of rhetoric we've heard him engage in before, talking about how he thinks American Jews should vote. Let's listen to that.
To the Jewish people, probably no person, period, to the Jewish people and Israel. When you think of Golan Heights, I mean, Golan Heights was something they weren't even thinking about. They've been trying to get it for 76 years. They would come every year to Israel, and for many, many decades, they'd have a meeting. It would last for 2 days, and they'd get on their planes and they'd leave. This took place for years. I came in, I said, tell me about the Golan Heights. I spoke with David Friedman, the ambassador, who was a great ambassador. I said, tell me about the Golan Heights. And he gave me a history lesson in about 5 minutes. I said, you should have that. You should have that. And I gave him the Golan Heights. Nobody else would have given it to him. And that's just one of so many things. And I gave them a lot of money so that they could protect themselves. And protect themselves they do, frankly, when you look at what's going on. But
they do it very well. Yep.
Yeah, but I gave them much of that power, and now you look at, but he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what to do, and he's really is a great advice giver, because if you go whatever he says, do the opposite, and you'll be in great shape. This guy is the worst foreign policy president in history. I mean, look at what happened with Ukraine.
Goes on in that vein for some time. You can track that down if you want to watch it. We're going to talk more about what's going on in Israel in a little bit later here with John Fowler and Jeremy Dicker of International Intrigue. So they'll join us in just a bit. But I want to talk a little bit more about the presidential race here at home, starting with Kamala Harris' 60 Minutes interview that unspools on the Tiffany Network in less than 2 hours. CBS yesterday released a soundbite related to Israel. And today, second bite they released is Kamala Harris talking about the economy. Let's listen to that.
My plan is about saying that when you invest in small businesses, you invest in the middle class, and you strengthen America's economy. Small businesses are part of the backbone of America's economy.
But pardon me, Madam Vice President, the question was, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes. It is not right that teachers and nurses and firefighters are paying a higher tax rate than billionaires and the biggest corporations. I plan on making that fair.
But we're dealing with the real world here.
But the real world includes...
How are you going to get this through Congress?
You know, when you talk quietly with a lot of folks in Congress, they know exactly what I'm talking about because their constituents know exactly what I'm talking about. Their constituents are those firefighters and teachers and nurses. My plan...
All right, so let me say three things reporting-wise, and then I'll remind everybody, if you want to be in the conversation, please raise your hand. Got some hands up. I'd love to see more, including more new people. So regarding the ongoing debate about the vice president's interview choices, some of her defenders are creating a false choice, suggesting she can only do these lighter interviews like she's doing tomorrow here in New York. She's due here this evening about with The View and Howard Stern and Colbert. Of course, it's smart to do those interviews. We talked about this a little bit in the morning meeting. That interview, we'll see what the rest of the 60 Minutes interview is like, but they're continue to make this fateful choice to spend most of their time now reaching audiences they need to reach. They're absolutely right that the percentage of viewers of shows like that, like these lighter shows of undecided voters, the percentage is almost certainly higher than it would be on a news program. But this question of whether she's passed the basic test that people think she needs to pass, that's not a creation of me. It's not a creation of the media. It's not a creation of Republicans. It's out of the mouths of a lot of undecided voters you've heard from on this platform that show up in focus groups. And again, she continues to make a fateful choice as the clock ticks down to spend her time doing what will be lighter interviews where there will be some serious questions, but not the kind that are going to elicit what many people say they want to hear. Two, on the race overall, I can't tell you how many people I heard today about the betting markets. We've been trying to book some guests to talk about the betting markets and defend them because I'm just a huge critic of them. I don't understand why people pay attention to them. The betting markets are less accurate than a chicken pecking at some feed. They're based on what people who don't know anything about politics or campaigns think and where they're putting their money. I guess it's interesting, but they know they're not people betting on football who know a lot about football. They're people who don't know anything about politics. I think largely they just key off polls that they read or Nate Silver. Not really sure. Maybe they like how Elon Musk jumps, but I don't understand why anybody's interested in what a bunch of non-experts think as a herd voting with their money. Again, when I say this, people say they'd love to come on the show and talk about it. Haven't yet found someone who actually will want to come on and talk to me about it. But I urge you to disregard the betting markets. I just don't understand why people think they reflect anything if you're trying to figure out what's going on with the race or what's likely to go on. Finally, I spend a lot of my day communicating with texts, emails, phone calls, people who are really studying the data. They're studying the polling and comparing it to historical polling. They're studying the absentee ballot requests. They're studying the early vote. And I can tell you, as I've said and written before, there's no clarity yet from what those people are saying. There are people who will tell you, if you look at all the data from Pennsylvania, it shows Trump's in a heap of trouble. And there are people who tell you, if you look at all the current data from Pennsylvania, it shows Trump has this locked up. And there, as Donald Trump would say, good people on both sides. I don't know the answer yet. I spent a lot of time working on it. What I can tell you is this. There are lots of Republicans, say lots, a not insignificant number of Republicans, who say the race is effectively over. That, as I reported a month ago, that Trump is going to lock up the Sun Belt states, probably all four, but at least three, and that he's going to win Pennsylvania, and that checkmates her. They may be wrong, but there's not an insignificant number of them who are quite confident of that. And the data they've seen on the absentees and the early votes and the voter registration, I should include that too, makes them more confident. I don't know a single Democrat who thinks that nationally about the Electoral College. I know some who think it about individual battleground states, but I haven't talked to, and I'm sure they exist, but I haven't talked to them yet. Democrats who are equally confident. That doesn't mean Harris is going to lose, but it is an asymmetry in my reporting that comes from a variety of people connected to the campaigns and not connected to the campaigns. I don't know where that means we're headed. I do know, again, that we've had very much polling in the last week, and what we've had has not been that good. It's not been either robust or very informative. And I continue to urge everybody, you see a 400-person poll and the likely voter screen doesn't seem clear, shouldn't let it affect your day. We're looking for big, robust polls by pollsters who know what they're doing. The New York Times teased this morning that they're about to publish their poll. That's going to have data on a few states and nationally, and a focus on Hispanic and Black voters. There's no doubt that Kamala Harris continues to have a problem with young Black and Hispanic men as compared to Joe Biden. Could she win if her numbers are worse than Biden there? Sure, she makes it up elsewhere, including with women. But it remains the case that both these candidates have ceilings of something below where they would need to be confident of a victory. And what the Republicans are now saying is, on the trajectory she's on, Harris's ceiling is lower than Trump's. Again, they may be wrong, but that's where they have confidence. And that's why they're somewhat confused by her doing what she's doing. They don't think that's going to expand where she is. All right. Again, I want to talk about the presidential race. Any questions you have? There's some great folks on here we're going to bring in to talk about that. But I want to start with John Fowler and Jeremy Dicker to talk about Israel and the Middle East and what's going on. And let's bring those two guys in if we can. John Fowler, welcome in, John. And Mr. Dicker, welcome in also. John, where are you tonight? Oh, hold on, gotta unmute you. One more time. There you go. Where are you, John?
Hi, Mark. I'm in Boston tonight. How are you?
All right. Hey, I'm good. And Jeremy, where are you?
I'm in Noosa, which is in Australia.
Yeah. Welcome back, both of you back here. John, it was seen by many, and for those who don't know, John and Jeremy are both former diplomats who write a newsletter called International Intrigue that I recommend to you. It was said by many that it was diplomatic error for Joe Biden to talk again and again and his team about a ceasefire and say we're going to get one in 2 weeks. It looks close, and then they never did. And some are now saying Joe Biden will leave office without one. Was that from a classic diplomacy 101 handbook? Was that a mistake to talk about it rather than just stay quiet until it was done?
It's a great question. I think your sort of standard answer would be yes, it's a mistake. You don't want to kind of signal where you are in a negotiation because things can always change. I suspect what the Biden team was thinking was they were trying to put in public pressure on Netanyahu on that side. I mean, they know that they can't really pressure Hamas publicly because Hamas will do whatever it wants to do. But I think the idea probably was to build this kind of momentum and box the Israeli government into into a ceasefire. They said, oh, it's almost done there. You don't want to be seen to be backing out of it because then international opinion will certainly blame you for no ceasefire. I think where if you could call it a miscalculation, is that I don't think Netanyahu really cares about that. He's going to do what he wants to do, and he doesn't particularly do what Biden says. So I don't know that I'd call it a mistake, but I don't really know how else Biden could have played it either. He has to be showing the American people and the world that he's trying. And if he stayed silent for a year and didn't announce it, I wonder if he'd get even stronger calls about what he's doing.
Jeremy, thank you. Jeremy, what's the optimist scenario for the next couple of months?
Optimist scenario, well, that really depends on who you ask. I mean, the same set of facts playing out in the Middle East are producing wildly divergent conclusions on what's going on. On the one hand, you've got South Africa accusing Israel at the world's highest court, the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide. And you've got the International Criminal Court putting out or seeking arrest warrants for people like Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, these are, serious allegations. On the other side, you have Israel and others supporting Israel, saying it's in the process of waging a very difficult counterterrorism operation, and it's delivering that in a way that has the lowest civilian death ratio in modern warfare history. I mean, these are two wildly different conclusions on the same set of facts playing out. In terms of an optimist scenario, I mean, I can see a future where Lebanon is liberated from the listed terrorist organization of Hezbollah, where the people of Gaza are liberated from the listed terrorist organization of Hamas, where the people of Iran are liberated from the decades-long proto-fascist theocracy that Ali Khamenei is running. I mean, I can see a world in which Israel, seemingly against all the odds a year ago, knocks out all of those foes. But in the process, I can see Lenny's made the good point. In the process, Israel's reputation is really taking a beating. And to go to your question to John and John's answer, the US is the #1 backer of Israel internationally, and US standing in the world has taken a hit from its support for Israel at the same time. I think that's partly also explains why the US has been so public in its calls for a ceasefire. It's aware that its own name is being dragged into this as it all plays out. But yeah, that's as optimistic as I can be. I don't know how realistic that is, though.
Yeah, I hear you. That's not bad under the circumstances, but obviously not something that happened in the near term. As divided as America is red and blue on domestic issues, I'm always struck by the disparity of views about foreign policy and the two paths, the Harris path or the Trump path. The Harris people believe Trump would be a complete disaster on foreign policy and make the world less safe, ruin our America's alliances around the world. The Trump people believe Harris would be weaker than Biden and naive. As you all look at the leaders of other countries, diplomats in other countries, the conventional wisdom in America in some quarters, and the press eggs this on, is that the world would like a Democratic president, that they don't want a return of Trump. Who on the international stage would like a return to Trump? And who would prefer Harris?
Well, I think that's generally true in that, you know, when you think about Europe and other kind of big American allies, they tend to be a little bit more left of center than America. So that would generally say that they would want a Harris administration. I think the obvious ones who would want a Trump one, you've got Viktor Orban in Hungary, obviously. Russia, I think Putin pretty unambiguously would want a Donald Trump presidency. I'm on the fence about what China wants. So I served in China as a diplomat, so it's probably the country I know best. And I think China's a little bit different to the other countries that routinely get mentioned in this kind of not pro-Trump camp, but generally anti-American camp. And China wants stability. Russia wants chaos. Russia would like America to be fighting each other, to have no trust in the election. China doesn't necessarily want that. China wants predictable American foreign policy that they can kind of manipulate and prod and poke at. So I think in some senses, China is a little scared by Donald Trump, but not because of, you know, that he beat them in a war or anything, but just that they don't know how to plan for him. I think.
What about the Saudis?
Yeah, I think the Saudis would prefer a Donald Trump presidency, not least because of the Abraham Accords. You know, one of the things that you started off this question talking about Israel, one of the things about the recent attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon that you don't see mentioned a lot in the press is how I think that's gone down in Riyadh. As the Saudis are pretty happy about that because they're no friends of Hezbollah or Iran. So while the Saudis aren't ever going to publicly say anything, you know, pro-Israel or positive about Israel or America, particularly in that region, they see what's happening in the last year, I think, with a cautious optimism because it's fighting their enemies as well without them having to do much. And I think Trump would probably be more likely to continue supporting Israel in that really strong kind of giving them a free hand way. So that's my take. I don't know, Jeremy, do you have any others that you would say would be more on the Trump side? Because I think Europe is obviously more on the Harris side.
Yeah, I mean, I think any US allies quietly would feel more comfortable with a Democratic presidency. And that's simply because I think for a lot of allies, the Trump presidency was a bit of a surprise in the way he approached alliances with a more transactional perspective, you know, wanting allies to, you know, do more of their fair share. You know, these are valid positions to have. But I think maybe the style in which he approached that caught allies by surprise. You know, the then Australian Prime Minister got caught by surprise. He was the first world leader to have an official phone call with Donald Trump, and it infamously ended in, you know, in acrimony and getting hung up on. So, you know, those sorts of experiences, which maybe the world got used to from a Trump presidency as it passed on. But I still think a lot of allies were a bit startled by that style of leadership out of the US. And so for that reason, I think probably a lot of US allies would just feel more comfortable, whether it was Democrat or Republican, I don't think they mind, but the specific personality of Donald Trump, I think they felt was unpredictable, and that startled some.
Okay. Let's go to your questions. If you've got questions about international affairs, about Israel, or anything else, John and Jeremy are here to answer them. If you want to talk about other stuff, I'll do my best to field them. Grateful to you all for joining. And again, if you want to get in and you don't have your hand up now, please raise your hand. All right, here we go. Carol, welcome in. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're supporting, and what's on your mind, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I am from a suburb of Boston. I am not supporting either candidate. I am supporting Jill Stein because I am an anti-war, people-powered campaign of a person. I was very active in the Bernie campaign in 2016. I think I traded votes with someone in Michigan in 2016. I voted I wrote in Bernie, and I think they voted for Hillary, you know, just because I'm in a safe state. Couple questions that I'm thinking about from the circles that I kind of go in and the people that I speak to. Kamala has a problem in Michigan. I know that sometimes on this platform, we've sort of poo-pooed this, fringe, niche left people.
No, we never do. We never
Well,
do.
Sean
Never
Spicer
do.
this morning, you call it some niche people on the left who are, you know, these
Well, that's just Sean.
these
That was Sean's
activists
opinion. That was Sean's opinion, but it's not the general view
No,
of the
I
platform.
agree. No, I agree. I have not heard a lot of concern about the Palestinians. We certainly haven't thrown around the word genocide here, I don't think, but there are a lot of people who feel that this has been a genocidal campaign by Israel against the people of Gaza. I agree that the horrific events of October 7th were indeed horrific, but what has happened since has been also horrific. So I guess for me, I'm just wondering, do we think that there is going to be a political fallout from our ironclad relationship with Israel, from the election standpoint? And I also feel like maybe it's undercounting the amount of people that are not going to vote for Harris or Trump because of what's going on in Israel. So,
okay, thank you, Carol.
Yep.
Guys, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I mean, Mark, you've probably got a better sense of the kind of national politics of it. We were tracking at International Intrigue, we were tracking the uncommitted movement for quite a while, which I'm sure you know was the group kind of promising, particularly in Democratic primaries, to vote uncommitted. They weren't going to support President Biden at the time. Our reporting and our kind of conversations suggest that movement has fizzled a fair bit in terms of its organizational powers. And that makes sense, right? As you go to the general election, the candidates tend to run more to the center. So folks pressuring from either extreme, I imagine, would have less sway inside the party. But what I think the interesting question about it is you don't know, even if it's not an organized movement, even if it's not kind of got a, not making the news every day, it's how many of those folks are actually just going to vote like that anyway, not going to turn up. And I think that's much more likely. I can't see people who firstly, if this is your first issue or your biggest issue in the election, I don't know how many people there are out there who will vote like that. Economy, all these other kinds of things generally tend to, I think, dominate. But if that is your big issue, I can't imagine you'd vote for Trump, because I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that he will give more support to Israel. But the question is, will you vote or not? And in Michigan, as we all know, it doesn't take many people not voting to swing that state. Mark, what do you think? I don't know.
Yeah, Carol, I would like to ask you two questions, if that's okay. First of all,
Sure.
Does Bernie Sanders making his preference clear that he wants people to vote for Kamala Harris, why does that mean nothing to you?
No, Bernie kind of lost me over the last few years. He lost me really in 2020 when he was, he's trying to ostensibly he was trying to beat Biden, and he just kept, he's a friend of mine. I like Joe. I think Joe can win too. I think he'd be, that doesn't fly with me. I was not, down with Biden. So. All
right. And Carol, last question. Why do you think Kamala Harris is, in your view, tilting too far towards Israel? What do you think? That's just her judgment, or is there something else that you'd attribute it to?
I feel like most politicians in this country are, reflexively backing Israel. It's an AIPAC. I'm assuming it's an AIPAC kind of pressure. And, unless you want to put sort of an arms embargo and put some pressure on Bibi to stop what he's doing, I don't think it's ever going to, and she's not going to do that.
Last question. Assuming that one of the two major party candidates is going to win, who would you prefer win the election?
Oh, Harris.
Yeah.
I can't really tolerate too much Trump. I don't think he's, I can't deal with the drama. I'm scared if he wins. I'm scared if he loses. I'm just, it's a big mess all the way around.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mark, do you mind if I just ask Carol a really quick question?
Sure, of course. Go ahead.
How do you feel about Iran's role, and what would you have Israel do from a foreign policy perspective? Is there a candidate who could come out with an Israeli, a pro or not pro, but a policy on Israel and the Middle East that you would support? Is it just a ceasefire, or what would be
I
attractive?
would love to see one um, democratic country in the Middle East that's Palestine. The two-state solution to me is a non-starter. There's been too much land sort of grabbed already. So I feel like the only real solution is a one-state democratic, one person, one vote, in sort of all of Gaza and the West Bank and the Golan Heights and all the different territories. I just don't know if that's a realistic situation, but that's what I would like to see. Because I do feel like on some level, I know that, they're in a tough neighborhood, all that stuff that people say, but I feel like, Israel does a lot of sort of proactive antagonizing of folks that I think.
Carol, yeah. Carol, thank you very much for you coming in. Okay, Bill, tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're supporting, and tell us what's on your mind, please.
What's up, guys? I'm from New York. My name is Bill, and I am supporting Trump. I hope you guys like my buzz cut. And Mark, I heard you're going on Call Me Daddy or Call Her Daddy tomorrow. Just a joke. No, so just one quick comment on the betting markets, and then I want to shift to Israel and Netanyahu. But when it does come to the betting markets, I don't know much about the political betting markets, but when it comes to sports or anything else, or just stocks, anytime you have a more liquid market, you have a much more efficient market. I mean, it can be it can be exploited.
It's efficient if the people providing the inputs have some expertise.
Well, that's true and also not true. Like I would say, like, I'm a big football fan, but I don't put my fandom or anything I know, like athletes are horrible gamblers because they use like what they know about a sport and then they're bad at it. But if you just look at it, if you just look at efficiencies, like just you look at the numbers, because the market is so fragmented, you can take advantage of that. You can say, okay, there's this number on this, like Apple stock is going to be the same price everywhere you go. But when it comes to, these sports betting markets or whatever it is, it's so fragmented that you have, prices that are incorrect. And so
I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not saying you can't make money off of it.
Okay.
I'm saying
enough.
they're not predictive of the outcome because the inputs are garbage.
Fair enough.
Sorry, but yes, you
right,
can make money off of them. It's like sending my son to college. I'm shorting Jeb Bush. Bill,
okay,
ahead.
so
what do you want to net be?
I'll shift to Israel. And guys, I signed up to Intrigue while we were doing this, so I'm an intriguer now, and I'm a
You'll
6.
enjoy it.
Welcome.
I'm a 6 on the Henry Kissinger scale. So when it comes to Israel, and just one thing that's always kind of just irked me a little bit, and I don't know how much my views on this are shared. But I remember, after October 7th happened last year, when, Biden went over there and said, he made the comment, don't make the same mistakes, that we made. To me, that, really got under my skin because, I mean, I look at, Bibi Netanyahu as someone who, has a lot of courage. He is surrounded by enemies and he is being told by his greatest allies. I mean, I look at the way that he's spoken about by Joe Biden, by Kamala Harris, and it really just rubs me the wrong way. I see this guy as he's facing his enemies. He's doing what's right for his country. And I have nothing but respect for that. And so I don't know, how a lot of these Western leaders are viewing this, especially I have a lot of Jewish friends. I come from the North Shore of Long Island. And they have a lot of concerns with what's happening here in the United States. And so I guess there's not really like a question that's tied into that, but I just, it's one of those things where, I mean, the way I see Netanyahu, I mean, I don't know if I'm in the minority, but I mean, I just think that he's been, I see, Zelensky, how he's, compared to Churchill. I don't see why Netanyahu, he's a war criminal. He's this, he's that. And I mean, I'm very turned off by that, and I just
Yeah. Bill,
yeah.
I'll tell you three reasons, and then I'll turn it over to Jeremy and John. One is he is under in criminal indictment, and the belief in many Israeli quarters is that he's making war choices based on trying to push back the date by which he would have to face justice. Two is he's got a coalition government that requires him to cater to the far right of his party, of his coalition, and often makes decisions that, again, people see as not in the country's best interest, but in the interest of keeping the coalition together. And then finally, there is the issue of accountability for the way he treated Hamas before the attack, and the fact that the country wasn't prepared for the attack. And again, the belief that perhaps he's extending the war for as long as he needs to avoid accountability on how his government allowed it to happen. There are many other reasons why people don't like him, but those are three that come to mind for me. And I think those are all three, at least arguably valid reasons to have some reservations about him. Jeremy.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say though, Bill, one interesting bit of polling that came out of Israel just last week, Israel's Channel 12 released polling showing that after Bibi, his support in domestic politics took a real hit after October 7th because, he was the prime minister and was seen to have failed in his duty to protect his country. But after the recent string of, tactical wins he's had against Hamas, Hezbollah, and other enemies, he is now really rebounding in the polls, and he's now back again as the preferred prime minister. But even still, as being back again as the preferred prime minister in terms of polling, if an election were held today, his party, Likud, would still be the largest party, but would probably lose to a coalition. So, a lot of people would agree with you, Bill. But the other thing I'd just say is that he's also Israel's longest serving prime minister. And several times prime minister, very hard in any democracy, but particularly a vibrant and raucous one like Israel, very hard to survive that long without, making enemies along the way, irritating people. And so, that just to add to Mark's 3 points that I totally agree with, that's another reason why there are probably some burnt people when it comes to Bibi Netanyahu.
John, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you guys covered it all. I think there is that domestic element. I mean, Bibi was quite unpopular before the attacks last year. There were the judicial reforms that brought 500,000, 1 million Israelis out onto the streets.
Yeah.
So
I meant to mention those too.
Yeah, it's the Hamas, the war question is obviously dominating Israeli politics, but there's a long history of Bibi Netanyahu, and I think a lot of Israelis would have, and other folks around the world have come to conclusions about Netanyahu based on things other than just the war as well.
Sure.
Bill, who's going to win the election and why?
I think Trump's going to win the election. I mean, I look at a lot of the numbers with where he's doing just a lot better than he was in 2020 and 2016. I did see Harry Enton earlier this morning say that Kamala Harris, her numbers with college educated voters has actually increased. So and they're a much broader part of the electorate. They're about 41% now, which it used to be lower than that. So that is an area of concern. But I look at all the other numbers. I look at the way it's trending, and it's our elections are usually toss-ups. I'm 60-40 Trump. I'm hopeful, but we'll see on election night.
All right, Bill, I'm glad you didn't say the betting markets. Thank you. So I'm bringing in Chris Simmons because he has his hand up and he's a Harris supporter. And I'm bringing in John Podhoretz because John was hosting a rival program in the chat. So I thought I'd break up that Michigas and bring John in. John, want to hear from you about today's events and about topics we've been discussing. But Chris, you're up first. What's on your mind, sir?
So I have a question for your two expert guests. Actually, I have a two-part question. What do you think explains your view on the one hand that the majority of international leaders are more comfortable with Kamala in the White House dealing with foreign policy matters, but the average American, at least as often expressed on this forum and other places, somehow thinks that we're safer with Trump getting the 3 a.m. call? That's part one. And then part two is, how do you explain or reconcile the fact that the Republicans in general seem to be very, very supportive of what we do to support Israel, but seem to be willing to let Ukraine just float off into the nothing land.
Yeah, they're complex questions. I'll take the second one first. I think Ukraine and Israel are just are quite different situations, and not even just, you know, geopolitically different. They've been portrayed completely differently in the media, right? So one has become, you know, I think against establishment Republican preferences, the Ukrainian situation has become a real kind of lightning rod for Trump's isolationist tendencies. Like, you know, MAGA foreign policy tends to be more isolationist than establishment Republicans, Democrats. But you can't do that with Israel, right? Like that's the kind of third rail of foreign policy in the US. You can't be like, oh, and also we shouldn't support Israel anymore and we should let them get attacked and we should just watch while, you know, heaven forbid something horrible happens to the state of Israel. So they're quite different politically in the US, and geopolitically they're quite different as well. You know, I would say the American and Israeli governments are far closer than the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government is very different. There's questions about why didn't the world kind of get upset when Russia took Crimea in 2014, but they did now. So there's just so many, and this is the way with foreign policy and geopolitics. You can never run a controlled experiment because there are so many different variables. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's not worthwhile comparing them, but it's really hard to draw any kind of like equivalencies. And I've forgotten your first question, but I'm sure Jeremy remembered it.
Yeah, both great questions, Chris. Your other question, I guess, about that discrepancy between lots of world leaders maybe feeling more comfortable with a Harris presidency, and the clash between that and the fact that you know, maybe many Americans would prefer Trump be the guy getting the 3 a.m. call. You know, one way to look at that is I think that polling suggests there is fatigue across the American people about the burden that the US has been holding around the world in upholding international rules and you know, stopping conflicts from breaking up, and that burden is under pressure all around the world right now. So I think to the extent that a political candidate can acknowledge that sense of fatigue and even appeal to that sense of fatigue, whether or not you agree that, you know, he can be the answer to that is another question. But I do think the way that Trump talks about the world, I think maybe appeals to that sense of fatigue. Like, this is all getting chaotic and I'm going to just stop it. And we've got to pull out of these, you know, these endless wars or whatever his line will be. So I think there's that part of it. The other part of it is, you know, there's also, I guess, a sense of pride in the US having a role of strength around the world, which is related to the first part of my question. And again, I think to the extent that a candidate appeals to that sense of pride around US strength, and that being the answer to the chaos that we're starting to see break out around the world, then that will resonate with voters. So, John, do you want to jump in as well?
Well, I would agree with that. There's a sense now, whether it's fair or not, that under the Biden-Harris administration, you've had Russia invade Ukraine, Gaza, all of the stuff happening in the Middle East. And I'm not in any way drawing like a direct line between their administration and those events happening, but it's very easy for Trump to say that. It's very easy for Republicans to go like, on your watch, X, Y, Z happened. On my watch, it didn't. Therefore, I'm better on foreign policy. Now, I don't think they're particularly kind of, you know, there's no causation there, but I can understand why someone who doesn't dip into the very complex issues of geopolitics, particularly regularly, if you're just kind of a casual observer of this stuff, that kind of makes basic sense, I guess, sort of.
Gentlemen, thank you. Chris, thank you. Appreciate it. Nancy Rollman's here. She was on the mean streets of Gotham City today, enjoying the protest. No, you never left the apartment, Nancy?
I know. I did leave the apartment. I was
right
in the mean streets today. Yes, I was.
All right. We're going to hear about that in a second. But John Podhoretz, little known fact about John, on the classic cocktail party question or dinner party question, if you could invite any 3 people to have dinner, who would you choose? John's answer: Vladimir Zelensky, Bibi Netanyahu, and Joey Heatherton. That's his list.
Heatherton,
John,
or Maureen McCormick, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. John, what's on your mind on this important day and regarding Kamala Harris's Bibi Netanyahu answer from yesterday?
I have a couple of observations that are
yes, sir.
unusual.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, as you may know today, went to the Ohel, that is the tomb of the.
Did you see the
Lubavitcher
video we
Rebbe.
played of that earlier? Did you see that video?
I'm sorry, I must have come on a little later.
Okay. While John's
I think
talking,
Trump-
please play the video again. So I want John to see it. Play
No,
the
I've
video
seen-
again. All right. I want
I've-
everybody who joined late to see it again. It's so good. Go ahead, John. Keep talking.
I was just going to say that this makes Trump the only person on the planet to have touched the glowing orb in Saudi Arabia and the tomb of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he either now has been invested with untold magical powers that we do not understand, or something terrible is going to, or he has overexposed himself to the mysteries of the universe, and will not survive these dual encounters with the holiness of Judaism and Islam at once. We still have no idea what that golden orb in Saudi Arabia was. Meanwhile, of course, 5 hours later, Kamala Harris plants a pomegranate tree on the grounds of the Naval Observatory where the vice president's house is, claiming that the pomegranate is a symbol of hope and righteousness in Judaism. It's not exactly what a pomegranate is. The pomegranate is considered notable because there is a myth that the pomegranate contains 613 seeds, which correspond to the number of laws that Jews are supposed to obey, as laid out in the 5 books of Moses. And the speech that she gave, which was very supportive of Judaism and Jews and never again and this and that and the other thing, sounded like she was reading it phonetically, like she doesn't speak English natively. And you know how sometimes actresses in the 40s and 50s movies who were imported from Europe would have to recite American dialogue, and you would hear that they had sort of learned it the way I speak Hebrew, for example, phonetically. So I think that sort of undercut whatever power her speech may have had. I think, just by the way, and finally to answer what you two guys are saying, which is so interesting, I think basically what's happened over the last month is that Israel, having spent a year trying to, or most of a year trying to figure out how to satisfy America's very inconstant back and forth advice, our domestic political problems, wanting to remain close to Biden, wanting not to push too many buttons and all of that. Around about July, basically Bibi Netanyahu and himself and then his cabinet, even though they're incredibly delicate about it, basically decided that they had to go forward with a plan of their own to complete the war in Gaza, and then found, for complex reasons, that the war against Hezbollah in the north had to start because their intelligence capabilities were about to be exposed. So they needed to use them or lose them. And so this probably started a little earlier than we expected. But we have here is an incapacitated president whose advice is not very helpful, and a candidate for president in the Democratic Party who wants to say as little as possible and not offend anybody on any side. And the Israelis simply have to go forward on their own path, because there is no path for them to follow. America is charting no path. America has no path. America has no advice. America has no policy. Its policy is a two-state solution, which is like my saying that, my policy is that I should lose 100 pounds by tomorrow morning so that I can fit into, the suit that I wore to my bar mitzvah. And that's not going to happen either. So that's I think the day's lessons are Israel's going it on its own path. Trump has magical powers from touching holy sites and different religions, and Kamala Harris speaks English as though she's learned it phonetically.
All right, so I wanted to go to Nancy, but I wanted you to know what has just crossed my phone screen from my Substack subscription. Kind of my worst nightmare. Nate Silver writing on this topic. What's behind Trump's surge in prediction markets? That's the last thing in the world I want to see. All right. For those of you who don't know Nancy, she's a fan of the two-way. She's also an
I'm
enterprising.
a fan of Nancy, as Nancy knows. Everyone
Thanks,
should
John.
read The Queen of Montague
she's-
Street by Nancy Rommelman.
And her new book, $40 in a Dream, Stories from Los Angeles. Nancy's going to tell us how people can buy it. But Nancy is my favorite kind of journalist because she's fearless and entrepreneurial. And that leads to today's tale of Nancy on the streets of New York City. Tell us what you saw.
Nancy back on the streets of New York City. Thanks, guys, very much. Yeah, if you want to buy 40 bucks in Retrieving Tales from Los Angeles, it's over on Amazon. It came out a couple of weeks ago. So, as you know, some of you people know, I've been covering the protests pretty religiously since 2019, including deeply in Portland, Oregon. Attended them for months and months. And at that time, you know, they're young people and they're full of passion, and you know, it was kind of interesting to me. Like, why are they doing this? How are they going about it? Yes, it's very violent, but also one-on-one, it's kind of interesting. I was at the DNC recently reporting for Reason, and there really seemed to be a lassitude. There seemed to be this sort of protester fatigue because, you know, the rage calories they need, whether it's going to be from George Floyd or Roe v. Wade or now, you know, Palestine and Israel, it's just like they've been doing it for 10 months. They're kind of not really getting anywhere. And I thought, man, there's kind of this protester fatigue. Well, I went out into the streets today, started down on Wall Street, because of course you're going to do it on October 7th, because that's really the day you want to do it, right? You want to do it on a day that you should be having some commemoration and like really thinking about people that have lost their lives and been kidnapped. But no, you're not. And not one time in all of the protests that I've attended since October 7th, not one time have I heard the protesters who are by and large pro-Palestinian. You'll have like 600 pro-Palestinian, sorry, I live in New York City here, and 6 guys from Israel, 6 like young dudes yelling at them and chanting. Not once have I heard about the massacre on October 7th in Israel and the kidnaps. Not once. Because if you allow that information in, it's going to really mess with your agenda here. So today we had, it was very loud. They have a couple of new things that they're doing. They laid out a flag that was probably about 80 feet long by the stock exchange, and they prayed at a certain point. They chanted, Israel kills, USA this, how many people did you kill today? About 75 times till everybody was in a trance. You had the usual people, you had the girl with the little squeezy piggy in the cop's face, kill yourself. And I got to tell you, I really love human beings, and I love to write these stories, but man, these people have got to get some new lines, because it has become they are so incurious and able to talk to you. They are just full of the same sloganeering, and they're not really getting anywhere, except of course they moved uptown and they start hitting old men in the head, because as a group, they're like all full of piss and vinegar. One-on-one, they might be interesting and nice. But I have to tell you, it was a bit enraging today. And I try not to get that way because it's my job to really report and bring it to you. But I've seen it for too long now. And I don't see where their mission here, where is it getting the cause? How is it bringing peace to the Middle East? I really think this has become masturbatory in a sense. It's so that they can feel something. But I don't think politically what they're doing is getting anybody anywhere.
Nancy, were there hundreds, thousands?
There
scores?
were, when I started out there, it was really weird because when I got there was like nobody but cops. So I have to say, the cops have really learned how to do this now. Like in Portland, it was a wreck. Now it's like, they got 600 officers in place. They kind of just chill until something happens. There were about 600 pro-Palestinian activists there. They know how to dress, they know what to say, they're not going to talk to you. I had to talk to the one person, the one spokesperson, blah, 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 the usual. I saw truly about 10 pro-Israel protesters, including one dude with a little tiny flag. And of course, they're just swarming him and screaming at him. I've got video cursing in his face, trying to cover him up. And I said to the guy who's wearing little glasses in the shape of hearts that's covering him up, I'm like, why don't you want to let him speak? Wouldn't even talk to me. They can't talk to you.
And were they literally hitting people in the head?
Well, they did uptown. Yeah, there's a video up now of a guy who was wearing I reported from Israel in January. I went to the Hostage and Family Center, and they have the bring them home now sweatshirts, and he was wearing one, and they were just hitting at him, and some girl smacked him with a tambourine, and he was bleeding, and they were pushing him around. Yeah, because as a group, they've got all this energy, and they're so angry, but again, one-on-one, they're mostly kids, but they're you get them in a group, it can get pretty hairy. It's
Yeah.
still going on because they were marching uptown. I think they were going to end at Columbus Circle, and of course, late
Yes.
at night is when you get the yahoos.
Can we
So
can we just pull back for a second and say, why are they doing this today? You know what happened today a year ago?
yeah,
1,200 Jews and Thai workers were murdered. 250 were taken hostage, and 3,500 people were injured as a result of an unwarranted and unprovoked invasion of Israeli territory. And a year later, the day is being hijacked
that's
by
right.
these people, many of whom are, I believe, paid agents of the Iranian regime. And I say that advisedly because we are told by Merrick Garland and the director of the FBI that there is direct Iranian contact between the protest movement in the United States and the Iranian regime. And the protest movement is bizarrely well funded. For example, in the spring, suddenly every group on campus across the country had hundreds and hundreds of Coleman tents that cost $200
Right.
in their
And
hands in a
it's the
day,
same tent. It's the same tent.
everywhere.
Yeah.
50,
Yeah.
60,
Let's-
70, 100 campuses. Something is going
let's-
on. And I
let's
don't
get
think that
Gary
this is innocent. This is malign, and this is very, very serious, and it should not be looked at as, some kind of just an exercise. It's an effort to hijack a day of mourning of somebody else's mourning, and turn it around into an attack on the mourners. And that is grotesque.
It
And
is grotesque. And that's
Yeah.
one of the first questions I asked this young woman who was with a group called In Our Lifetimes. I'm like, why do you think it's important to do this today? She said, well, because the media's here. That was her answer. There was nothing else
Gary.
about life or anything, just because the media's here and we want our message out. That was it.
Gary, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are, who you're supporting for president, and what's on your mind.
I live in Flagstaff, Arizona. I am a Republican for Harris, and I've been very active wearing a t-shirt that says Republicans for Harris and getting lots of attention.
Yes, Gary, you told me earlier today, how many of those have you already given out?
I've given out about a couple dozen, but I've given out flyers of here's where you can pick up your free t-shirt and yard signs. I've given out 150 copies of the flyer.
Gary, who'd you vote for in 2016, Clinton or Trump?
Neither. I voted for Evan McMullen.
Yeah, 2020, Biden or Trump?
In 2020, for the first time in 48 years, I voted for a Democrat for president.
Yeah, and how's your state looking now?
I think that there is a real John McCain Republican revenge vote, which will slowly bring us over to Harris. I'm a Liz Cheney Republican, but a lot of Arizona Republicans are John McCain Republicans. They don't like how McCain was treated.
Thank you for all that, John. Gary, do you want to ask a question or just hawk your t-shirts? You're welcome to ask a question or not, up to you. I just want to give you the opportunity.
I want you to know that I listen to John Podhoretz every night as I go to sleep. He is great, and I just wish he were 7 days a week instead of 5 days a week. And his voice is like from the Princess Brides, the narrator.
Mandy Patinkin. Yeah,
He's
that's
just
high praise.
He's
Peter
just
Falk is the narrator.
You,
no, Peter
Columbo,
Falk.
That's really
Peter
Peter Falk. He just has that very calming voice, and I go to sleep listening to John.
Oh,
yeah.
Well,
This platform largely exists for John to meet people from around America.
you
who
guys
love
are
him.
just pretty much. Pretty much, it's just like it's an ego boost for me. So I'm happy to. I will say I would just want to point out about the Republicans for Harris thing. Or I don't know that that's gonna make a difference, but I will say that as a storyline for the election, given how little the Harris campaign is feeding the media with storylines, giving very little direction in things to talk about. This is one that they did that actually I think has a little meat on the bones, right? I mean, with the country over party event and some of this other stuff, I think it's all probably mostly illusory, but at least it's something to talk about other than she likes the middle
Yeah.
class and she had a second mother and the coconut tree and
Yeah.
what else she says.
Gary, stand up a little bit. Let us see the shirt here.
Pretty cool.
It's good fonts. All right.
I'm a
Gary.
lawyer and I wear this every day. I wear it to the courthouse. I just don't wear it into the courtroom, but I've worn this for the last month and I am a walking permission structure.
You gotta send one to Jake Tapper because he collects unusual presidential memorabilia. That's a good one.
Gary, is it all cotton, Gary?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. Come back regularly. Keep us posted. Gary, thank you. John, thank you. Nancy, thank you for reporting from the streets. And buy Nancy's book. And Jeremy and John, no kidding. Subscribe to their newsletter, International Intrigue. I read it every day. It's an incredible resource, and it's got a unique perspective. As I said, they're former diplomats. They write less like clueless journalists and more like people who actually know what they're talking about, which is an interesting concept. We'll be back tomorrow on this platform, 9 a.m. Eastern time. Sean and Dan and I, we might have a surprise. We might not, but we will have all the day's news, including the 60 Minutes interview, which will break down as if it were some combination of the Zapruder film and Vanderbilt versus Alabama. So we'll see you at 9. And then tomorrow night, this show is on now every night at 6, regardless of what else I need to be doing. I just left a really interesting meeting right next door to come talk to everybody, going back to the meeting. But I'll be back at 6 tomorrow night, Eastern time, right here. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again, 9 a.m. Thank you.